Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show, the show that every single day celebrates so many incredible people who are working to make Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, I came across a quote the other day, and I started to dive a little bit deeper into this quote, and it hit me that some really significant things that happened in history around the months of June and July. I mean, for example, one is the Mount Everest explorer Sir Edmund Hillary was born in 1919. And you think about Sir Edmund Hillary and what he did. I've always been intrigued by Mount Everest, this whole notion of what it takes to get to the peak of Mount Everest, the kind of teamwork that it takes, the kind of dogged determination it takes. You set that goal, and it's a tough one. And I got to studying, a little bit more about Sir Edmund Hillary, and I came across this quote. And you're talking about minimizing something significant like getting to the peak of Mount Everest. But here's what he said. You don't have to be a fantastic hero to do certain things, to compete. You can just be an ordinary chap, sufficiently motivated to reach challenging goals. Well, I don't know how many people would see Sir Edmund Hillary as an ordinary chap, but there is a lot to be said for how anyone can achieve amazing goals in their life if they just set their mind to it. Another one I ran across that happened in June back in 1969 is Neil Armstrong being the first man to walk on the moon. Think about that effort and the role of space flight in those days, not having all the fancy computers that we have today. We really got an eye into that when we saw the Apollo 13 movie, to see literally the process they went to get those guys back safely. And then another kind of significant event that happened in 1976, Viking 1 was the first aircraft to successfully make it to Mars. And now, if you think about it, the kind of conversations we're having thanks to Elon Musk and others about landing men and women on the surface of Mars and establishing a colony. Gosh, mankind has come a long way in a short period of time. That's the main message from all that. And there's a lot of ordinary people, I guess, involved in those efforts that are doing extraordinary things. Anyway, just kind of words to think about. Hey, let's shift gears now. I want to move to my friend Sean Tindell, who is someone that I admire and respect, and he has tremendous responsibilities for public safety in the state of Mississippi. We'll remind you what all that is here in just a second. Sean, how you doing, my friend?
Doing good. It's a hot day in Mississippi, so just trying to stay cool.
Well, he's sitting in his headquarters, and the air condition is out. And I think before we started the show, he said it was 83 degrees in his office. That's hot, my friend.
It is. I don't think there's a Mississippian who hasn't had their air go out in the heat of summer. And so I think everybody knows what it's like. And so we just keep on keeping on, dress appropriately, and try to bear the heat.
Listen, for people who haven't heard you and I talk before, when you think about the Department of Public Safety, you tend to think about Highway Patrol. But, boy, there's a lot more to it than that. Let's remind people what you have to say grace over.
Sure. So obviously Highway Patrol is our largest division. But beyond that, we have the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, Capitol Police, the Commercial Transportation Enforcement Division, the Mississippi Office of Homeland Security, the Driver Services Bureau, which obviously issues driver's license across the state. We have the Mississippi Forensics Lab, which is commonly referred to as our crime lab. The medical examiner's office that performs autopsies across the state. We have Mississippi Office of Public Safety and Planning, which oversees millions and millions of dollars of federal grants that come in and initiatives to try to make our highways and interstates safer. We also have the Mississippi Law Enforcement Officers Training Academy. And I would mention, and even though even in some of these divisions, we have some smaller functions. The Sex Offender Registry is assigned to MBI. We handle all the registration of sex offenders across the state. We have the Criminal Information Center that takes in all the criminal data and then pushes it out to locals when they want to do background checks on new employees or people that they're trying to get information about. MBI handles that. Over at the Office of Public Safety and Planning, that's where we have the Board of Minimum Standards for Law Enforcement, which meets monthly to set minimum standards by which law enforcement officers operate. and hold their certifications and set those standards. So even within those 11 divisions, we have a lot of other smaller divisions that do a lot of important things for our state. And it really is an impressive group of men and women that make all this come together and happen.
Well, we'll come back during our visit today and kind of break some of that down and talk about some of the most important things that you're involved in these days. Like, for example, the Capitol Police, that people probably didn't have that in their at top of mind. And during this past legislative session, a lot of conversations about Capitol Police and the expanding role of the Capitol Police. But we'll come back to all that here shortly. One of the things that, in keeping up with you, Sean, you have a very, very significant role that you play in the state to help keep all of us safe, but you're also a dad. And what I've enjoyed sort of watching you balance the work that you do with enjoying your kids, like whether it be involved, being involved in youth sports, or whether, be fishing with your kids, while they're on vacation for the summer, for their break. You have to find time to find balance with them. And I think, watching you've done a fairly good job at that.
I try, I grew up with a single mom, and then she met my stepdad when I was about 4. And then I had grandparents that were very engaged in my life. So I think I learned the importance of family and family time. We always had a saying at our house, work hard, play hard. And that's kind of the way I've tried to approach what it is I do these days. And then balancing the family. And it's one of the things when I travel the state and I talk to our law enforcement officers at Highway Patrol and our other divisions, I want to emphasize the importance. Look, I know you got to make money, you want to work overtime. But spending time with your family makes you a better law enforcement officer, and it puts you on your A game. And that's where I need you to be. Is if things are good at home, you're going to be better at work. And so it's keeping that life and family and work balance that everybody struggles with. It's a real challenge. But at the end of the day, I feel like when those things are in balance, you get a better product from me. And so some people might look at it and say, oh, he's having too much fun. He's always playing. He's off with his kids, this and that. But that makes me better from 8 to 5 and makes me focus on the job I got to do when I know my kids are getting what they need from me, too.
You get a reminder. You probably get a reminder every day if you were to share the situations that your office comes in contact with, sometimes on a daily basis, that put people who are dedicating their lives to law enforcement in this state, put them in some very, very difficult situations that, because they were able to sort of get through them and de-escalate them, we don't always hear about them. And in some cases we do hear about them. But it's a dangerous world these guys live in. And since the last time you and I talked, Randy Tyler from the Madison Police Department was killed. And yes. I watched you, I made a special note to myself during the aftermath of that, because I think actually you're the one who put up online the fundraiser to help pay his family expenses and educational expenses for his family, and with a lot of good response that came from that. But I think, what I came to understand about you is whether it's someone in your direct responsibility or anyone in the law enforcement community, when one of you is impacted, you all are responding in some way or another. But it's a tough job at times, isn't it?
It is, and those are the worst days. When it's within the organization, you have to meet with the family members, or even when it's outside the organization, it's still a public safety family. And it's really one of the things that I think gets overlooked in today's world for whatever reason. It's the sacrifices that these officers make. And I know there's a lot of dangerous jobs out there, but I practiced law for 20 years. I didn't see any lawyers dying in the line of duty. And so, I think it's something that we really need to pat them on the back, tell them thank you. And again, I go back to spending time with family. It's why it's so important that we give them the opportunity to spend that time with their sons and their daughters at the Little League fields or the dance recitals. I think as it stands right now, too many law enforcement officers are trying to work too many hours. We've created a culture where it's, try to work overtime, try to get callbacks and extra money to make ends meet. And I'm a firm believer that if you're in law enforcement or public safety, you ought to be able to make a livable wage. I was proud to see Ocean Springs recently down on the coast up their salaries, I believe, to about $45,000. I think that's tremendous. I think it's sad that some other departments on the coast have starting salaries in the 30s for law enforcement officers. And it's just the reality is you cannot make a living in today's world if you're trying to support a family at that range. And if we're trying to get the best quality officers, we need to offer competitive salaries that get them there. And I'm going to make a push this year that we get a minimum salary for law enforcement and public safety officers at $40,000 a year.
So yeah, when I was in private business, pay was always something we paid a lot of attention to. And I have a comment I want to make about that when we get on the other side. But when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with my friend, a really dedicated leader in this state, Sean Tindell, who's the commissioner of the Department of Public Safety here in Mississippi. We'll see you after this. As we said when we went to the break, Sean Tindell, the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety in Mississippi, has a lot of responsibilities, multiple organizations that he's responsible for in this state that all have to do with keeping us safe. And you know what? I don't know if we're less safe than we used to be, or if social media just shows us how safe we aren't. I don't know what the right word for that is, or the right explanation for that is. Maybe you have a sense of that as it relates to the numbers. But when we went to break, one of the things you and I were talking about was that that there has to be a living wage for patrolmen. And I tell you, in private business, one of the things we always did is do annual surveys. We wanted to understand sort of where people's pay was relative to the market and relative to people who did like jobs in other areas. We wanted to understand where we were in that. And every now and then, jobs would emerge, new jobs would emerge. It's always tweaks you got to make in that. But we wanted to understand, are we being competitive? And one of the things I often said was that maybe it would be better to have fewer higher paid people than more lesser paid people, because the reality of paying less is you actually may end up having less people too, because what happens is you can't retain them. So by paying less, you have a number that would be in terms of the number of employees you would have would be greater than if you were to pay each of them more, but you never are at full staff because you're constantly turning people over. So sometimes it is better to have less higher paid people as a way to sort of manage the turnover. But either way, living wage is really important, and if you don't pay it, there's growing competition between jurisdictions for the best talent as it relates to law enforcement, and that's an issue, isn't it? Absolutely.
And you look at the state of Tennessee just increased their highway patrol salaries, their state trooper salaries starting at $65,000. You've got jurisdictions in Mississippi like DeSoto County who have starting salaries in the mid 50s. And right now for our state troopers, they're at 50, which is higher than a lot of local jurisdictions, but still, you want to get the best and the brightest. So we're trying to get our salaries up, and I really, it does, going back to the salaries that I see for the entry level law enforcement in some areas, it's just too low. You're not going to, I think, get the quality you want. And if you do, you're forcing them to work 2 or 3 jobs. And in the reality is, in today's world, we expect so much of our law enforcement officers that they've got to be a marriage therapist, they got to be a mental health counselor, they need to be a constitutional scholar. Somebody's got a phone in their mouth and quoting all the amendments to the Constitution. And really, we want them well versed in all those things. But we've got to train them, and we've got to pay them, and we've got to really go out there and be willing to step up to make sure they get a livable wage. And then again, make sure they're on their A game when they're working. If they're working, 16-hour days trying to do 2 jobs to make ends meet, when they have that encounter, when they've got to be at the top of their game, they're not going to be. And that's when we end up with these tragic situations and mistakes are made. And so, much like what you see with truckers, the industry had to come together and say, look, we have to limit the number of hours that truck drivers are driving. And make sure that they get rest time. And we really got to do the same with our law enforcement and public safety to make sure that they're A, getting the training they need, but B, getting the resources and the rest they need too.
What you said a few minutes ago about being a constitutional scholar and a marriage counselor and a psychologist and all of these things, Coming back to what I said at the beginning of the show, they're actually less safe than they were before. And the reality is they have to be more trained than they were before. And as you and I have discussed, the requirements for new employees is so much greater than it used to be. And the training that they have to be subject to is so much greater than it used to be. In the old days, you give them a little talking to and give them a gun in a car and then turn them loose. Man, those days are long gone. And they do encounter. I mean, one of my friends who's in law enforcement, he said if he had to sort of boil it all down, the thing that's different is when you pull someone over, too many just don't have respect for you anymore. And if you just can imagine the various conversations, the maturations of conversations that can come out of a situation where they don't respect you, it's hard to have control of the situation. And that's probably one of the scariest parts of the job, because that it's hard to de-escalate a scenario when the person you're trying to de-escalate it with has no respect for you. And it's tough.
Yeah, and they want to often escalate the situation. So you're trying to de-escalate, they're trying to escalate, and it is dangerous. I'll tell you, domestics are obviously the worst kind of calls for law enforcement officers to show up to. Those have the highest propensity for violence and attacks on law enforcement. But the traffic stops are right up there as well. And when it comes to the traffic stops, one of the big pushes again next year that we're going to make in our legislative request is to bring back mandatory driver's education programs that are taught in our 8th and 9th grade, so that we can have a law enforcement interaction part of that course where we teach them about interacting with law enforcement, because oftentimes the first time some of these young people have ever interacted with a law enforcement officer is when they're stopped on the side of a road for a traffic violation. And we want to get ahead of that to let them know that we're here to try to make them safe, not cause any problems. And there are certain protocols that they should consider. But in addition to that, and the reason why we feel like that legislation is important, we spend a lot of time talking about active shooter situations, preparing our schools, shoring up the defenses of our schools to respond to those incidences. The reality is we've lost far more teenagers to fatal accidents on our roadways than we have in active shooters. And so we want to make a big push to try to get Mississippi off the bottom of that list where we've been for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done a good job with me to help me understand that distracted driving is a major killer. I mean, it is a major killer. And we're not talking enough about it, are we, buddy?
We're not talking enough about it. And for these young drivers, it's even more difficult. My 15-year-old is he has his permit right now. And so we're spending a lot of time driving. And just if you throw that kind of distraction in on there with him, I can't imagine how bad he'd be, because he does have difficulty just learning to see the whole road. They kind of get that tunnel vision when they're young. And then if you throw a phone in their hand or playing with the radio or talking to their friends, it's really more than they can handle. So we've got to work on that. And really just the basic training. I took driver's ed at Gulfport High. I don't even know that they offer driver's ed at Gulfport schools anymore. We got to do better.
I know we have to do better. I watched a podcast the other day, and I just kind of tripped over it. I was doing, every morning I go in and watch news about Ukraine and other stuff just to try to stay up on what's going on. And I came across a podcast talking about pot, about marijuana and the decriminalization of marijuana across the United States. And these were two really knowledgeable guys. And the main point they were making is that the pot of today is not the pot that existed back in the 70s. It's so much stronger. It's so much more pure. And it is, it makes you super high. Now, I don't know, because I don't smoke it, but they were talking about, getting behind a car and driving a car under the influence of some of the strains of marijuana that's available to people today with the decriminalization and all that. Then you add to that all the other drugs that people have access to. We used to worry about drinking and driving, but it's gotten so much more complicated, hasn't it?
It has, and the reality is, for alcohol, there's scientifically proven tests that we can issue, a breathalyzer test or a blood test that shows the alcohol content that can reasonably be related to the impairment level of that individual. The problem with the marijuana is that they haven't really put anything through the court system yet that scientifically links the amount in their blood streams or hair analysis that is a direct correlation to their impairment. So with that, our law enforcement officers have to be trained in the good old ways of proving under the influence and look at those signs of impairment. And the public needs to understand there's not going to be that test that's going to show one way or the other. It's going to be up to the officer's observation. So if he smells marijuana, if you show the signs of being high, you're going to get charged with operating a vehicle under the influence. And folks just need to be responsible and understand you can do one or you can do the other, but you can't do both. And so it's going to be a strict compliance on the under the influence, particularly as it pertains to the marijuana.
When you see the rise in fentanyl use and how deadly fentanyl is, and I can't even believe that the notion of the amount of fentanyl coming across the border can even become a political issue. Seems like that's something we should all be able to get together on, and it doesn't matter what your political persuasion are, because because at the end of the day, the people who are dying from fentanyl overdose, I mean, we don't care what color they are or what their socioeconomic background is or what their politics is. I'm amazed, Sean, that we can't come together on something like that.
It's shocking, and to me, it's even more of a reason to secure our border. I get all the political of immigration policies and what have you, but having a secure border to prevent those types of illicit drugs from coming across just freely makes good sense for everybody. And it kind of goes back to what I try to talk about even with Capitol Police, which I know we're going to talk about. When you take the politics out of law enforcement, it actually works pretty good. So we need to take the politics out of securing our border so that law enforcement can do their job and stop those illegal drugs.
We'll pick it up from there on the other side when we continue our conversation with Sean Tindell. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Sean Tindell with us, and there's so many different places we could take the conversation because he's when it comes to law enforcement, I would refer to you as sort of a jack of all trades. And you came in there drinking from a fire hose. You had to learn a lot. You had to get your team in place, which you did. And then you had to also at the same time simultaneously deal with the realities of the current events and sort of what the world's all about. But when you look at, as we were discussing, we went to break, you look at sort of the drug situation. It's really scary, man. And I had a friend of mine's son not long ago died of an overdose, and you keep hearing that over and over again, man. What's your message to parents?
Just be vigilant. Know where your kids are and who they're hanging out with and what they're doing. And even if you do all those things, I've talked to mothers who have sent their kids off to college on scholarships, and they get a hold of a drug that they think is a pharmaceutical grade, but it's actually been made in some clandestine lab that and somebody's laced it with fentanyl. And so they take what they think is a pharmaceutical drug issued at Walgreens, and it ends up being a fake that's laced with fentanyl, and it costs them their lives. And I'll say this, I feel like, and I'm no expert on the matter, but we've got to be willing to have these conversations with our kids. I know sometimes they're uncomfortable. I deal with it when I talk about sex with my children, or if I talk about drug use or alcohol use with my children. You can't just be the ostrich and put your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. So you got to have those real conversations with them, warn them of the dangers, scare them about the dangers. And I just, from my own experience, I remember my mom talking to me about drug use and people that she knew and how it ruined their lives. And that had an impact on me. So I've tried to pass that down to my kids. And I think, some kids are going to try it, but you got to give them the warning and tell them to try to stay away from it and show them the impacts that it can have on their lives. It's amazing to me that anybody would see what methamphetamine's done to individuals who have done it and would go out and use that drug. When you look at cocaine and the problems that's caused for people, it's amazing that anybody would take it, knowing what it does to them.
It is amazing, isn't it? There is no FDA when it comes to illicit drugs, and young people who don't know better and they trust their friends, so to speak. you really don't know where it came from. And you talked about illicit labs. I mean, they just don't care. They don't care if what comes from this are dead children. And it's a lot more dangerous than it used to be, man. That's just the bottom line.
And it happens. And that's why we've had a record number of overdose deaths over the last, really since COVID. And so the fentanyl, it's being laced with that to make it a stronger high. And with that, these young people are dying. And so, again, educate your children. Tell them, unless you know exactly where it came from, don't take it. You're risking your life if you do. And it's just not worth it. And if there's any, and I'm sure there'll be some positives that come out of the medical marijuana laws that we've accepted in Mississippi. But one of the big positives that I think could be is if these are being regulated by the Department of Health, they do come from certified dispensaries. At least you'll have some assurances that the product you're getting is what it's supposed to be. And so maybe over time, this will prove to be a wise decision. I don't know, but at least that's one of the positives with it.
Looking back, we'll shift gears now, but looking back about the last legislative sessions and all the debate and discussion about the role the Capitol Police should play in our state's capital. It was what to me, and you know how I feel about this because we chatted about it, and at some point, in fact, I'd like to put that show together that you and I talked about, bringing in some of your key leaders, and let's talk about it. Let's just hit the hell. Let's go straight to this discussion about race. And too many people wanted those bills to be about race. They wanted, the work of the expanding role of the Capitol Police and the lack of leadership in Jackson. They exacerbated the whole situation because they tried to make it about race. But at the end of the day, it was just about making the state capitol safe. And now that we've gotten through a lot of those debates and all that noise and smoke around all of that, how are you guys doing at the moment?
We're doing a great job. Chief Lucky is growing the Capitol Police Force. We had started off with about 70 officers, and we're now up to about 130. Our goal is to get to 170. That's been a massive increase in the presence of law enforcement for the CCID. But with that, we're also working jointly with our neighboring jurisdictions. When they need help, we go in and help, whether it's Pearl, whether it's Ridgeland, whether it's Richland, whether it's Jackson. And so we're trying to do what we can to help the Jackson metro area and all its safety efforts. And really, I hope that as we move forward with this, whether you're coming up here with your grandchildren to go to the museum or somebody in Tupelo has a court case, they got to go to the Supreme Court, or somebody from DeSoto County that's heading to the rodeo, when they come to their capital city, when they come to the CCID, that they feel safe. They don't have to walk around in fear. And I think as we do that, what we're going to see is a greater investment in the city of Jackson, which hopefully will lead to more money, and the city can put it to use wisely, which I would encourage greater expansion of the Jackson Police Department, more efforts to deal with youth and youth violence, because we're not going to police our way out of all these problems. We've got to address the neglected youth in our state. And look, and when I tell people when they bring up Jackson and the efforts here, it's just because it's the capital city while we're doing this. There's no doubt that we need more efforts in Gulfport, Columbus. There are cities across this state that are facing issues because of neglected youth that we need to address, and we're not going to just be able to police our way out of it. But we've got to get some environments where these kids can thrive instead of just being dragged down. And so there's a lot to the puzzle that's beyond just law enforcement.
Yeah, I've had, just so many different conversations, whether it be with Chief Miller in Biloxi, the chief in Biloxi, about the challenges in the community, whether it be with the mayors along the coast, or even the Boys and Girls Club, which incidentally I think is doing some great work of keeping kids that are in very tough situations busy and giving them hope and giving them sort of a way out, so to speak. But as you and I have talked about before, and as I've discussed with each of them, the if you don't have a role model in your family that will help guide you, then they will find a role model, and the role model too often may not necessarily be the one you want them to have, and suddenly now they're in a bad situation where they have access to the wrong kind of advice, extraordinarily violent situations, weapons that are all weapons are dangerous, but if it's possible to have more dangerous weapons, they have access to those. And on and on and on, and it's a spiral. And we know that if we can get the kids early in their lives and get them the kind of mentorship and keep them busy, keep them active in programs like the Boys and Girls Club and other programs bring to the table, we can have a big impact. But if we don't have that, we're looking at big time issues going forward. And that's true in a lot of metro areas, isn't it?
Absolutely. And look, it takes the entire community. It takes the family. Maintaining the family dynamic obviously is very important. My parents were separated when I was born, but my dad was still engaged in my life. And so these kids that are growing up 2 or 3 generations without a father figure, there's going to be a lot of problems in those community. And even when I was a legislator, somebody asked me at one of our forums, what are you going to do to fix the education problems in Mississippi? And I just said, look, I'm not an educator. There's only so much I can do, but I can tell you what I'm going to do in my community. I'm going to coach little leagues. I'm going to coach football teams. I'm going to interact with these young people to hopefully be a role model. My wife's going to be involved with the PTA, and we're going to be engaged in our community. And I think if everybody one-on-one does those things, think how much better our state would be and our youth are going to be for tomorrow. But it's going to take everybody getting engaged. I listened to your show the other day. I know you had D.A. Crosby Parker on, and he's been very big with the Boys and Girls Club. That takes a lot of time out of his life to do that. But his goal is to ensure that the future is better for some of these young people. And that's really, if everybody did 1/10 of what he does, we'd be in a lot better place.
I can't agree more, man. It takes a village. It really does. It takes a village. And then you think about, people who don't understand hunting, they don't get this. But when you think about youth archery programs and other competitive situations that involve archery and maybe even in some cases guns, you don't ever hear of any of those kids going astray. And now you have the Biden administration. Again, this is not a political show, but they're now taking funding away from school programs that involve, hunting. Like, are you kidding me? We're having tremendous success all over the country, bringing kids that would not otherwise enjoy the outdoors or what it takes to be conservation oriented, what it takes to be safe, what it takes to be really safe. And they're being introduced to these programs, and now they're going to start stopping funding to these. Oh my gosh, we're so misdirected. Right. Hey, listen, let's do this right at the end of the segment. Well, at the end of the segment, I'll let you respond on the other side. But we're visiting with Sean Tindell. We'll see you right after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Sean Tindell, who's the Commissioner of Public Safety in Mississippi. And when we went to break, we were just talking about how we should engage our kids and, the Biden administration not giving any funding to any school that has anything to do with hunting education. It's just crazy. I don't get it. But did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, hunting, you learn the value of life. You understand that when you fire that rifle and it strikes the animal, that animal's not going to breathe anymore. Its life's going to cease to exist. And those are valuable lessons to learn at a young age, so that you have respect for the firearm, you have a respect for life. And I think the frustrating thing, and you and I talked about it, is, instead of encouraging them to learn the value of life through that, kids learn the value of life through playing video games, and they think that life is not valuable, that you can just respawn, and when shooting somebody is just a video game. And so, I think if there was going to be an effort made to defund or take away or eliminate, let's look at restricting the access of young minds to violent video games, like, of course, you got Modern Warfare and Grand Theft Auto, and 10-year-olds playing that game get a warped sense of reality. And so we wonder why 13-year-olds are shooting each other.
Hey, listen, I wanted to circle back on one thing, because this notion of getting young people engaged and giving them things to do is part of the solution for how to reduce crime, especially in some of these major cities. And that was the point that you were making. But I want to make sure we didn't leave this point, and that is that you mentioned that the Capitol Police for the CCID for Jackson is going to go to 170. That is a substantial increase from where it was. By the way, tell people what CCID is and how it might have been tweaked some.
So the CCID is the Capital Improvement District, and so it went all the way to just north of Lakeland Avenue. And if you're in the city of Jackson, that's kind of your main core of all the state government inside the city of Jackson. It started at Jackson State, and then it went up to just past UMMC. And so in that you have Millsaps. You have UMMC, you had the Mississippi College School of Law, you had a lot of universities in there too. But that's kind of your core state government as well, all your state government buildings. What they have done is they have expanded it to go a little bit further past that to encompass more of the city of Jackson. And the goal there is to, again, be a force multiplier with the city of Jackson. The city will still have jurisdiction in the CCID. We will have jurisdiction outside to help the city when they need it. And the entire goal is to be a force multiplier. And one of the complaints that I've heard is, well, what do I do if I have a complaint? I mean, I elect my mayor. This is being appointed by the governor. Well, you elect your governor. You elect your legislators. In fact, there's more legislators that are elected in the city of Jackson than there are city council members. So if you have a complaint, talk to your legislator. And I answer the calls from all of them. It doesn't matter what party or where they're from. We're trying to do our part to make the city safer, and so it's that's the core of it, and it's, I think, much needed, and I think we're seeing some good results.
Yeah. So the cooperation with the city is fairly good.
Yeah, it's come a long ways. I think in the beginning, it's kind of an arranged marriage, if you will, and everybody's trying to figure out the other person. But I think over time we've gotten more comfortable. And one of the things that I was very pragmatic about and insisted upon in the beginning is we're not going to throw our partners in law enforcement under the bus. We're not going to do anything to make them look bad. We're not going to say anything negative about them. And we're going to make sure we're working together, and we're going to emphasize teamwork all the time. And it doesn't matter what they say or what's put out there. Our mission is that we want to work with you. And so I think that's paid dividends in the long run. And I hope that we continue to have that same kind of relationship. One of the things that came to my attention attending some of the church meetings and listening to the citizens that live in the CCID, we needed to do a better job of reaching out to the community. I was kind of guilty of looking at it from a state law enforcement perspective and forgetting my roots in Gulfport and working at the local DA's office and as a city prosecutor in Biloxi, how important the community engagement was. So we've hired somebody now that is actually responsible for community engagement at the Capitol Police, and I think that's going to prove to be a benefit so that we can interact with the public more, and hopefully ultimately set up some different youth leagues and stuff like that, partnering with the city to provide these opportunities for kids to do other stuff in the CCID.
Yeah, so it's so interesting, your point about how you could tweak and improve your perspective and how all of you guys lead as it relates to that. But I would say that when I talk to frontline police chiefs, they all talk about this, and that is the importance of connecting with the community. And the time to connect is not after you have a problem. It's before you have a problem, so that when you can, it just makes a tremendous difference in how you process a problem. And so proactive is way, way better than reaction, isn't it? Absolutely. And then those relationships matter. And then the trust that you build along the way matters. So we've tried to recognize that. And then we've tried to also do it on the statewide level. NBI has done a better job of reaching out to police chiefs and sheriffs and NBN as well. And all of that is trying to connect with the people throughout the state on a local level. Well, listen, Sean Tindell, from a air-conditioned-less office that's probably well into the mid-80s by this point, thank you for taking the time to join us today, my friend.
Always great being here.
This has been Sean Tindell, the Commissioner of Public Safety for Mississippi. It's always great to catch up with him. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
You too. We'll see you, Rick.